I'm responsible.
I'm responsible.
I'm responsible.
I'm responsible.
I'm responsible.
I'm responsible.
For making a difference. It's your time. You choose.
Good evening. I'm Katie O'Toole, and I'd like to welcome everyone who is here this evening at the Hetzel Union Building on the Penn State campus. And welcome also to those who are viewing us on the web, courtesy of Penn State Public Broadcasting. Tonight is the second of 4 voter forums titled, What's at Stake? This series has been planned by PSU Votes, a nonpartisan town gown initiative that aims to engage students in the prominent issues in this year's election, and to inspire students to go out and vote on November 6th. Now, tonight's forum is going to focus on 2 issues of particular significance to college-age students, jobs and student aid. Both the presidential candidates and candidates for local and statewide offices have very different positions on these issues, so it's worth taking a little bit of time to figure out what those positions are and which ones match up with the way you would like to vote. Your demographic could very well be what determines the future path of our nation, because 1/4 of all eligible young voters, that's voters between the ages of 18 and 24, are in college right now. So you really can alter the impact of elections next month. Now, before we begin, I'd like to extend a special welcome to the members of the Penn State Glee Club. They're here to lead us in the singing of our national anthem, so if you could all please stand.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, our bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
That was a lovely rendition. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And now let me briefly review the format for tonight's event. Our 2 panelists will each give a brief presentation. You should have received some white cards on your way in. You can use those to write down any questions you may have for either or both of our panelists. Throughout the course of the evening, both during their presentation and during the question and answer session that follows, we will have some volunteers who will be circulating throughout the room to collect your questions. They'll bring the questions up to me, and then following the presentations, I'll ask as many of those questions as time permits. Can we have the volunteers wave their hands to identify themselves? So as you see, we have plenty of volunteers, so just pass your questions on to them, and we'll get them answered as readily as we can. Our speakers for tonight. Our first speaker is Anna Griswold. She's the Assistant Vice President for Undergraduate Education and the Executive Director for Student Aid at Penn State, a position she's held since 1991. She's worked in student aid administration for 42 years. She has a master's degree in higher education from the University of Memphis and has completed doctoral level coursework in the Higher Education Administration program at Penn State. Ms. Griswold has been active in student aid professional organizations throughout her career, serving in leadership positions at the national, regional, and state levels. She has served as a consultant to the U.S. Department of Education and has testified before the U.S. House of Representatives on student aid-related issues. Please welcome Anna Griswold.
Thank you, Katie, and good evening, everyone. I've been asked to talk tonight about federal student aid and what's at stake in the upcoming presidential election. I would like to give a brief historical context first and then share with you what federal student aid means to Penn State students today. Then, from there, I think I'll share some of the major factors that currently affect policy discussions that are going on related to higher education and student aid, some key issues surrounding federal student aid, and how each of the candidates and their parties would address those issues. Historically, U.S. presidents have spoken directly to the value of education and the need for equality to ensure access to education for all who seek to obtain further education, regardless of one's position in life. Thomas Jefferson stated that an experiment in democracy would only be successful if there were a well-educated electorate. He admonished that the need to cultivate the talent of the electorate that exists both among the poor and the rich was an important concept. Abraham Lincoln signed the Land Grant Act in 1862, creating colleges whose purpose was to serve and promote education for those in the industrial class. President Roosevelt's administration created the GI Bill in 1944, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. President Truman appointed a commission on higher education in 1946 to deal with the issue of how to expand educational opportunity for all able young people. President Johnson signed the Economic Opportunity Act in 1964, creating the College Work-Study program, and the Higher Education Act in 1965, creating grant and loan programs that are the foundation of federal student aid programs today. Jimmy Carter signed into law the Middle Income Student Assistance Act, which expanded the Pell Grant program and the availability of student loan subsidies, interest subsidies to students. President George H.W. Bush suggested the concept of a federal direct student loan, and he created a pilot program in 1994. Bill Clinton created programs that would help students repay college loans after graduation, programs such as AmeriCorps. George W. Bush's administration continued to promote college access and affordability with the Academic Competitiveness Grant and the TEACH Grant. President Obama has made higher education and financial aid a priority during his presidency by increasing the maximum Pell Grant, as well as fighting for the continuation of the 3.4 interest rate on student loans. Through the federal student aid programs, access to a college education has become available to most all who wish to pursue education beyond high school in this country. Let's look at how these programs assist Penn State students today. Last year, over 74,000 students at Penn State received assistance, and the majority of those received assistance through federal student aid programs. Total federal funding for undergraduate students was just over $650 million, and to graduate and professional students, just over $78 million, a total of $728.4 million in federal student aid dollars coming to our students here at Penn State. 31% of our students, almost 24,000 students, benefit from the Pell Grant program, totaling $82 million. 58%, about 53,000 students, received the Stafford Direct Student Loan, and almost 11,000 parents of Penn State undergraduates used the federal parent loan program to help fund their students' education costs. Interest rates in the need-based programs are 3.4% while students are enrolled. Loan terms are favorable for both the student loans and the parent loans. Repayment plans and loan forgiveness programs help students manage repayment when their loans come due, when they begin repayment after graduation. But there is concern about student loan debt. Recently, the amount students may borrow has actually increased in order to assist students with rising college costs across the country. Eligibility for federal student loans is open to most all students in good standing. And more students are turning to the loan programs for assistance. This has especially been true as we hear reports regularly in our office about from students about their parents who have lost their jobs during this very difficult economic downturn that we've been in, and have therefore started turning to seek assistance to the financial aid programs. So the lack of employment has been a real factor, as well as difficulty for students finding summer employment, which many students rely on to help pay their costs. There are several overriding factors that impact student aid, especially in recent years. Certainly the national deficit and the struggling economy top the list. Congress is concerned about return on investment in the student aid programs, concerned that not enough students are completing their degrees. And a final concern impacting student aid policy is the stringent regulations governing the programs, which many fear are becoming a barrier to a student being able to access the programs that they need. A number of issues that flow from these factors will face the next president. The Pell Grant has become a very costly program to sustain, and there is a call to hold colleges more accountable to ensure that students complete their degrees as they benefit from these programs. There is a lessening of support for the supplemental grant program, with proposals to either eliminate it or merge it with the Pell Grant program. Congress wants to restructure the Perkins Loan Program. This is a smaller federal loan program, but assists many students at Penn State. And they want to use it as an extension of the Stafford Direct Loan. Several issues are at the forefront of student loans in the current discussions around federal student aid. In 2013, new federal loans could see the interest rate double from 3.4% to 6.8%, along with an increase in the fees that students pay to actually take out these loans. The origination fees. So there is a true cost to borrowing, and keeping those interest rates down and the fees down becomes very important. Fees for graduate student loans and for the parent loan will increase from 4% to 4.3%. Student indebtedness is at an all-time high nationally at 26,000. And this is another issue that is on the minds of legislators. And finally, Congress is concerned that students are not aware that there are programs out there to assist them in managing the repayment of their loans. So there's great concern about students going into default on their loans, yet there are ways for students to manage these loans. It's difficult trying to get that message across and that understanding out there and known to all students. And there is a concern, as I mentioned before, about growing regulatory burden on colleges and universities that administer these programs. So how will the presidential candidates and their parties approach addressing these various issues? Governor Romney would make accountability a priority through funding cuts, and restrictions on eligibility, which he believes will force colleges to reduce costs and will result in a higher return on investment. He would consolidate the various student aid programs to create one grant program and one loan program. That sounds simple and straightforward, but there is a downside to that. He would deregulate federal student aid, though there are no specifics as to how he would go about doing that. Governor Romney would return the role of banks in making federal student loans, and he would put more money into the college work-study program as a job creator. President Obama would also increase accountability for colleges and universities in order to keep costs, in the hopes of keeping costs down, and to increase graduation rates as well. He has already put initiatives in place to move this direction forward. President Obama would maintain the Pell Grant program as a priority to support college access. He would maintain funding in the campus-based programs of work study, supplemental opportunity grant, and Perkins loans, all of which give colleges flexibility in assisting students to come up with the total package of assistance that they need to pay for college. But he would tie appropriations to colleges that receive funding in these three programs to metrics of college success in graduating students who benefit from that funding. And these metrics of success would be applied not just to colleges and universities, but also to students to be successful in completing their degrees as they are assisted through these programs. So some areas of common principle between the two candidates include support for policies that work toward making colleges more affordable, that increase accountability for success and college completion, and that ensure greater consumer information for students and families to facilitate their decision about which college to choose and perhaps about how much to borrow to pay for college. These similarities will, however, reflect very different approaches for setting policy in each of the candidates' plans. Federal student aid programs represent significant funding to Penn State students, and federal policy that directs these programs are at stake in this election. For this reason, the proposals of each candidate should be a matter of great importance to us all. Students at Penn State struggle to pay the cost of their education. My office sees this every day as we try to help students find the funding that they need. There is insufficient funding in these programs to begin with. It sounds like a lot, but it is not enough. So your vote for the candidate whom you believe will continue these programs and strengthen the federal support for financial aid programs has never been more important. Those are some of the high-level highlights, if you will, of what each candidate has put forward so far. There is greater detail out there for the reading in my time here this evening, not enough to review all of it, but I have hit what some of the major issues and concerns are that is shaping the discussions during this election. Thank you.
Thank you very much for laying the foundation there for us on student aid. And those of you who have your student aid all figured out and you know where you're going, if you have questions, get them ready right now. But now let's think about when you get through that stage of the student aid and into the job search process. We have someone here who's going to tell you a little bit about that. Our next speaker is Paul Whitehead. He's a professor of practice here at University Park, specializing in labor and employment law. He has his undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of Wisconsin, and he's an honors graduate of Harvard Law School. For 28 years, he's worked as a lawyer for the United Steelworkers in Pittsburgh, serving as the union's general counsel from 2001 to 2009. Professor Whitehead also chaired the Board of Trustees of the Allegheny County Community College for 11 years. Since 2009, he's been a faculty member at Penn State, where he currently teaches in both the School of Labor Studies and Employment Relations and the Dickinson School of Law. Please welcome Paul Whitehead.
Thank you. Good evening, students. Anna, that was a very thoughtful presentation. 2 weeks ago in this room, Jay Paterno and Coquise Washington and a graduate student, David Bittner, kicked off this series of 4 meetings by offering different but equally moving words of encouragement for every Penn State student to vote on November 6th. You can see and hear their remarks by simply typing in PSU votes on your browser. And together, they made some very key points. They reminded us that voting is an American's privilege and duty, that soldiers and civilians alike have struggled and even died for our right to vote, that as recently as 50 years ago, blacks and Hispanics did not always have a meaningful right to vote in much of our country, and that 100 years ago, women had no right to vote. In other words, they recalled for us just how precious a privilege the vote is, and for some, how recently acquired it is. Tonight, Anna and I are trying to build on the points made by those first speakers, certainly to echo how vital it is to vote, and to take their point one step further to discuss with you these impacts on the issues of student aid and jobs. I'm going to try on jobs. Given the time limits, here's a really brief background on the jobs issue, and then I'd like to highlight the different philosophies and a few of the many proposals that the 2 major candidates for president offer on the subject of jobs. In all the debating back and forth, there are, I think, a few common facts that launch the discussion on jobs. To begin, both campaigns agree that we experienced in the Great Recession of 07-09, the most damaging crisis since the Great Depression. People agree that in the wake of that, the combined efforts of people and their government helped to prevent capsizing of the boat. Also a matter of record is that unemployment reached a peak of 10% in October of 2009, and that in the first quarter of 2010, we began to see a series of monthly net increases in private sector jobs that has continued for 31 months to date, but, and this is also undisputed, that overall rate of job creation has been slower than that of other past recoveries. As many of you know, I think, for most of this year, we have seen unemployment hovering above or near 8%, until very recently when it declined to a preliminary estimate of 7.8% just last month. Let's consider for a minute the unemployment rate for Americans in the range of 20 to 24 years old, a pretty close estimate of college age. The young adult unemployment rate has traditionally been higher than the all-adult rate. What about right now? Well, with adult unemployment at that current estimate of 7.8%, Americans in the 20 to 24-year-old range have averaged in the first 9 months of this year, and this is for all races, all genders, and all education levels in the age group. It's averaged 13.3%, and the monthly rate for last month, September, declined to 12.4%. So, to recap, adults are at 7.8%, that's all adults, and 20 to 24-year-olds are at 12.4%. And if we narrow it down to college graduates, those under 25, their unemployment has been in the 9 to 9.5% range, and that's about 20% higher than the all-adult level. That 9.5% does not include the percentage of young college grads who are underemployed in the sense of having part-time work but wanting full-time. and that would, of course, bring the number higher yet. When you stand back from all those numbers, one of the things you see is that new college graduates face generally the same kinds of labor market challenges as do all adults, except more so. And the obvious difficulty is cyclically weak demand for their services. To put it the other way, the challenges facing recent college graduates are not very structural, according to a Federal Reserve study of last year. Structural unemployment problems refer to significant mismatches between employer needs on the one hand and worker skills on the other. Because college graduates are so recently trained and often very willing to move to a new job, they can generally match up better than some of their elders with available job opportunities. Okay, now to the campaigns and their proposals. What we've just reviewed means that when you turn to the candidates, and I've visited their websites on behalf of you in the audience, there are not many proposals in either campaign tailored specifically for your age and education group. The thinking of both campaigns appears to be, generally, that adults of all ages, and recent college grads included, are facing the same kind, if not the same degree, of challenge in the job market. So you won't find a heading called Issues for Recent College Graduates, at least at the official websites. That's point one. So to examine the campaign proposals that count here, you have to go to the general proposals of the campaigns for speeding the creation of jobs. I'm about to give you some of the highlights, and I should make one thing clear. If you want to learn a little more about what each of the campaigns is offering on the subject of jobs, I recommend you visit the websites of the two campaigns. It's quite easy. Type in Obama for president, Romney for president, and there you'll see, nicely summarized, their overall proposals for picking up the pace of growth. And interestingly, the two sites each try to keep the other honest, at least relatively speaking. What do you learn there? Well, it's a very large subject and hardly easy to summarize in just a few minutes. The candidates have different philosophies, and those produce, in some cases, proposals from both campaigns in the same general category. I'm thinking of things like tax cuts or energy development, but differing importantly in outline. We can begin with the incumbent president, Barack Obama, whose record of the last 3.5 years helps to identify his approach and his proposals. While I would say that both candidates see the private sector as the engine of job growth, and while both candidates favor substantial tax cuts, the president's approach puts greater emphasis on the role that direct government spending can play in reviving the economy. That's not to say that President Obama supports no tax cuts, but simply that Governor Romney uses that tool more, as we shall see. On this question of taxes, President Obama, for his part, favors an extension of the Bush income tax cuts for individuals making $250,000 or less, but he would allow those lower Bush-initiated rates to expire for those in higher income categories. He would also return the capital gains and dividends tax rates to their Clinton-era levels. President Obama also proposes selective tax cuts for small businesses. Governor Romney proposes a less regulated business sector as a key ingredient of his approach. He would extend the Bush tax cuts for Americans at all income levels, and then from that point, he would reduce rates still further, that is, by another 20% off of each bracket. Realizing that such cuts raise deficit questions, he commits to offsetting the revenue loss from those lower rates by eliminating deductions and other write-offs to achieve a goal of revenue neutrality. He would preserve the Bush rates on capital gains and dividends. He would reduce the corporate tax from its nominal level of 35% to 25%, and he would eliminate the estate tax. On spending, President Obama includes in his proposals construction projects, infrastructure projects involving roads and bridges and the like, and school construction jobs. That is to say, I should say school jobs, both for reconstruction of rundown school buildings and for employment of up to 100,000 teachers. These last 2 points to make up for cuts at the state and local level. President Obama proposes loan assistance in the energy sector for innovation in wind and solar energy, and he stands by the financial regulation that followed the Wall Street bailouts. That's the Dodd-Frank bill, and he would preserve health care reform. President Romney sharply criticizes these Obama approaches as too reliant on government spending and regulation. There are 5 major ingredients to Governor Romney's program: taxes, as we have seen, the expansion of trade, with the emphasis on the opening of new markets, and the labeling of countries like China as a currency manipulator, energy production, including a variety of incentives and opening up more federal lands to exploration, deficit reduction, a topic well beyond my scope, and a package of small business tax credits. On spending, there may be no other issue that captures the candidates' differences better than President Obama's having provided relief to the auto industry in the depth of the Great Recession. Governor Romney has consistently opposed that on principle and asserted that the industry should have received nothing more or less from the government than ordinary bankruptcy court treatment that would be available to any other industry. So Governor Romney puts a premium not on direct government measures, funding projects as such, but on the creation of a tax and regulatory environment that he believes will spur business development and hiring. His website tells the visitor that he wants to make America the best country in the world to create a business. President Obama argues that his campaign advances proposals that begin with the interests of the middle class, and as his campaign goes on to say, with changes that, quote, spread out from there. Okay, enough of the positions, partial as this has been. I'd like to consider for a moment the kinds of students we have at this university in an array of majors and interests, and suggest how these very big proposals can have traction in their student lives. If, for example, you are an engineer in one of the many engineering schools here, this election presents any number of issues that could affect your career, ranging from, on the one hand, Governor Romney's proposals for much greater energy independence from foreign oil, to give just one example, to those of the president urging energy initiatives in wind and solar, or government spending on infrastructure projects. If you were a major in primary or secondary ed, or educational administration, both candidates have proposals directed to public education, with President Obama proposing the additional 100,000 teachers, and Governor Romney having presented a proposal for up to $25 billion of federal funding for school vouchers to be provided to parents to use in local school districts. If you are in social work, your career will be directly affected by whatever changes are made in Medicare and Medicaid, and those policies are very much at stake in this election, with Governor Romney favoring, number one, the moving of Medicaid, the public health program for the poor, to the states for their decision-making, and two, the introduction to Medicare for people 55 and younger of a program whereby the future Medicare beneficiary buys his or her health insurance on the insurance market. On the last point, while it goes beyond immediate job concerns, Medicare and Social Security will affect, I should think, every student's life, whether it will be there for you, in what form and in what amount, what you will have to save on your own for retirement, and whether in your middle-aged years these programs will adequately support your parents. If ever there were an issue to warrant student voting, it seems like that one. I'm sure students know that older Americans vote in large numbers. They care about these issues, and these issues involve questions of intergenerational fairness. Please, don't be without a voice in this process. Suppose you're a business major intending to work in the financial industry, Well, whether you'll work with the financial regulation of banks and large investment houses that is now in the Dodd-Frank bill will depend in all likelihood on this election, as President Obama favors its continuation while Governor Romney urges its scaling back. Or maybe you're a business major planning to become an entrepreneur. You'll certainly want to acquaint yourself with Governor Romney's intention to increase the number of new business startups, should he be elected. What if you're a student in nursing or a pre-med biology student or in health policy administration? Surely your career can be deeply affected by whether this election continues the health care reform law or brings its repeal. Hinging on that issue is whether we'll have enough health care personnel to bring 30 million people into the non-emergency room part of this system, as some would put it, or whether health care reform marks an unacceptable federal intrusion, if not takeover, of health care, as others maintain. Every single student is affected by whether the next administration supports that part of health care reform that allows young adults until the age of 26 to stay on their parents' health care. That's part of health care reform. You and your parents may be counting on it, and Governor Romney might well clarify whether that is a feature that he would reinstate following first a repeal of Obamacare. Whatever your major, certainly if you plan to work in the public policy arena or public administration, the deficit issue underpins all of the tax and spending debates that implicate the well-being of our government, its ability to meet its obligations, and to do many of the things it currently does. Finally, whatever your major field, the defense budget affects us all, both in the size of the military, its personnel and equipment needs, its expense, its effectiveness in keeping us safe. Governor Romney would increase defense spending substantially above the level proposed by President Obama. Really, for all students, and certainly for our ROTC students, this election provides, let's take the ROTC students, for example, with a voice in the shape of their forces and the selection of their commander-in-chief for the next 4 years. I've only meant for these examples to whet a student's appetite to seek out more information about the campaign, all of it pretty available at your fingertips. I'm coming to the end here. While I have focused on the presidential race, I should not omit that all of us have an enormous stake, not just in choice of president, but in the races and the referenda further down the ballot for senators and congresspersons and state legislators. The last group, so often the on-deck hitters for federal office. For Congress in particular, November 6th is a chance to vote to move that body from its frequent positions of deadlock in a direction you support. My time is almost up. I want to close by respectfully asking every Penn State student to consider the following. Our students are leaders in civic engagement, in a spirit of volunteership, in their pride in this institution, even after a very troubled year that is demanding new things of us, and in their performance in competitive situations. Our students vie in everything from blood drives to food drives to engineering contests to a host of other academic competitions. They support remarkable fundraising projects, and on a couple of days' notice, they can produce a whiteout or a blueout by tens of thousands of people. I ask, with no intention of trivializing the election, isn't this election a civic event worthy of our students' finest performance? I ask each and every student within the sound of my voice to please make a pledge to yourself, for your job prospects as you gauge them against what the campaigns are offering, for your community and your state and your country, for our democracy, and for your university to make that pledge to vote this November 6th and tell others that you're doing it. You know, some university in this big and wonderful country is going to produce the highest student voter turnout of any of the great colleges in our land. This year, why shouldn't the largest student turnout in America be right here at Penn State? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a couple of questions, and I would invite more questions as we continue here today. The first question, with the high debt incurred from higher education, how do we encourage students to pursue very necessary but lower paying professions, such as social services, teaching, the arts, etc.? Anna, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Are you on here?
Yes.
Okay, good. You know, one thing that we are trying to do is to get the word out, and we're picking up momentum on it, and there's still time because of the rules that apply to this. But for students whose careers will lead them into public service jobs, there is a new public service loan forgiveness program. And it goes like this. Students who, after 10 years and working in a public service job, while making payments on their student loan, and then I'll come back to that in just a moment, at the end of their 10 years of service in public service type jobs, any remaining unpaid balance on their student loan will be forgiven. Typically, students start out with a repayment plan that calls for completion of repayment within 10 years. So how can this happen? Under the public service loan forgiveness, there is a new program, relatively new, income-based repayment. And notoriously, public service jobs are not the highest paying jobs. Students who go into income-based repayment plans can have their monthly loan repayments reduced significantly. It requires only a portion, a smaller portion of your net income to meet your repayment obligations. So at that rate, after 10 years of employment, you would not have paid off the full balance of your loan. Any remaining amount would be forgiven then, as long as you had made those lower monthly payments on a consistent, regular basis for 12 months.
Did you want to add anything to that, Paul? Was that okay? I think this question may also be for you, Anna. What are the benefits of having one grant system favored by the Republicans versus multiple grant systems?
You know, there I think will always be multiple grants, not necessarily all within the federal. We currently have a state grant program for residents of Pennsylvania. All states have a state grant program for residents. There is some simplicity in saying let's have one grant program. It makes it easy to understand how college financial aid works. Concern is great among people in my profession that if we lump all grant funds together, the total available dollars will not necessarily grow accordingly. The funding would go away for any of those grant programs that might be eliminated. And while those are not huge programs, they are also not insignificant. I mentioned in my remarks the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. And we have several thousand students a year who get that grant in addition to their Pell Grant. So those are programs, if we reduce to one grant, one loan, some of the smaller programs would give us less tools to work with to try to put together a fuller package of assistance to aid students. So I'd like to not see them go away. They've certainly proven the test of time. I went to school on a Perkins loan, which was originally called the National Defense Education Loan many, many years ago. Many people have benefited from that program over the years, and it's a great program. The funds that are repaid to that program stay within the colleges and universities, and it revolves, and it continues to help students over time. So I think it's a great program. I'd like to not see it go away. Not sure what the thinking is of everyone who is putting forth this idea of eliminating programs.
I believe this question is for you, Paul. What majors for today's college students may be most likely to lead to employment after college, so students don't end up in that 9% figure? In other words, where are the jobs?
Well, I I would love to check in with the Career Services Office to help me answer that question, and I haven't done it recently. I think we all know that there's a great need in the so-called STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, math. You know, if you look at job reports, there are 3 sectors that do well through thick and thin: healthcare, government, and education. My department head in the Labor and Employment Relations Department has a seat in, he's a government professor with a seat not only in our department, but health policy. He's really got it covered, all 3 areas. And there are other areas that, but I guess anyone in a liberal arts college wants to put in a good word for Greek and Latin and philosophy and English, and I hope I didn't include on that list anything that isn't one of the more challenged fields. So I'm not quarreling with the premise of the question, but I do hope we save those liberal arts fields and that employers understand the enormous value of a person with that kind of background, their ability to learn and their adaptability, et cetera.
And I think we're back to you for this question. Where can we find out about the loan repayment programs that are available to students?
You can start with the student aid website, www.psu.edu/student-aid. You can also go to ed.gov, G-O-V. The Department of Education has a comprehensive listing of the repayment plans that are available to students and various forgiveness programs.
And another one for you. Are you aware if students attending community colleges have access to student aid and loans?
Yes, they do. The same programs that are available here at Penn State are available at all community colleges.
And isn't it true that a Pell Grant for a community college student can cover a much greater percentage of need than for the typical public university?
Yes, that's correct. The amount of Pell Grant, and our students are at the maximum. Not every student gets the maximum grant, but those at the highest eligibility get the highest grant because of where our costs are. But that same grant at a community college would simply pay a higher proportion of the cost because they're lower cost institutions.
Okay, Paul, I think this one may be for you. What do you see regarding the future of public service unions and industry loans?
Oh, well, public employee unions, which are on the firing line, and industry loans like in the auto, or I guess is the question. Well, they're certainly under attack. I grew up in the state of Wisconsin, and it's been ground zero for the contraction of public employee rights. I think public employee unions are working very hard right now, between and among themselves, working on carrying a message to the public that they really are public servants. If I may say, I think certain governors have done a very good job of allying the voter with the employer interest in that situation. That is to say, as taxpayers, the pocket. And I know from many people in public employee unions that they're working very hard to reach out to every citizen in their locality to teach them about what they do, to teach them about their rather limited pension rights, the fact that their overall compensation is quite comparable to public sector analogs. The reason that sometimes looks higher is because very low skill people do better than in the private sector, but high skill people, technicians, geologists, scientists, 1,000,001 statisticians, the other people who work in the government certainly don't do as well in the government as. So what do I see as the future? I see a continuation of this. Much of it will be driven by the public pension situation. There are in certain states extreme underfunding in pensions, and I think that will drive the issue in a very direct way. As far as industry loans, I've come to think of auto as a rather unique situation. And I'm not sure what would happen in the event of obviously there was a bailout of the financial industry as well, and we all know that. But I'm just not sure whether the next administration will have the same ability, flexibility to bail out, so to speak, another industry. I understand the question, and I don't really know the answer on that one.
There's so much information and misinformation. How can I really know who to vote for? I'll let you decide who
Well,
wants to
we
take
might
that
both
first.
take a crack at that. It's a very good point. I would suggest you take the plunge and watch the debates. I think that's a learning experience. Imperfect, but still a learning experience. I recommend you go to the websites of the campaigns. As they say, take it with not a grain of salt, use the whole cellar. Read the other site. There's a bit of an adversarial system, at the risk of sounding like a lawyer. There's a big clash, and it's imperfect, I know. I'm a big believer in good citizenship groups like the League of Women Voters and their candidate statements. What else? Well, behind me, this is a great source, the PSU Votes website. It's actually very well referenced and cataloged. Probably the easiest single thing you could do is type in PSU Votes, go to that website, and begin to scroll around. Do you want to add some, Anna?
The only group that or another group that does come to my mind that I believe, and I wish I knew this for certain, that Penn State student groups have signed on to recently, PIRG, Public Interest Research Group. They do an awful lot and seem to have a special eye for looking at candidates with respect to their policies and proposals that would directly impact college students. So I imagine pirg.org would be the website where you might find some good information as well.
This is a bit of a follow-up question to that. To what extent can I believe what the facts and figures that candidates throw around in debates? And if I can't believe them, why should I watch?
Well, it's the best and only democracy we have. I mean, I don't have an alternative system for you. I think you'll develop thicker skin with experience. I guess much of what you watch on TV you learn to take with a grain of salt. Isn't that true of most of the advertising you see? Political communication overlaps with advertising. And now, on the other hand, maybe you've turned off the commercials altogether. I just encourage people to slog through. To abandon the field is a very big deal. There are forces in our political life and our economic life who wouldn't mind at all for you to abandon it. And you really must stay engaged to look out for your interests. You're not perfect, but if anyone in here is lacking confidence about their ability to cast an informed vote, I would encourage you to get over that and realize that no one knows better in your life than you. If you want to consult expert sources or independent sources, great. But if you haven't had the time or something, I would say consult with yourself and a friend and do your best. But vote.
Did you want to add anything?
It's a big question. It's an important one, and I think that if it's your first time voting, especially in a major election, I would agree with Paul. Do the best you can. Seek out sources that you feel comfortable with learning more about the issues, and take the plunge and vote. It's better to just get your feet wet and at least try to explore best you can what the issues are, how they would impact you, your peers, your family. So if you think about everything you're hearing and think about your own situation, your family, and then try to frame best you can what the candidates are really saying and what they have to say and how it might impact you and those close to you, is as good a starting point for your first time out.
Could I ask Anna a question? I wanted to ask Anna, in her presentation it was clear that both campaigns are interested in this, some kind of, I'm not sure I'm saying it right, curtailment of aid intended to curtail tuition. And when two campaigns are on the same page, I wonder whether universities are talking to each other about how they would want that to be expressed in policy language, or whether the Big Ten or some community of colleges is getting together to, it seems it would have to be taken a little more seriously than other things on the list.
I think one of the issues behind this idea of let's reduce student aid and that will reduce costs is the belief by many that the more student aid you give an institution to help their students, it'll just give them the rein to raise costs, because there will be student aid to help offset those increased costs. That is really not the case. There have been studies done that prove that that is just not so, that there is not a direct correlation between the amount of funding in the federal student aid programs and what happens to costs of education. There is much more at play there. The type of education, especially the one offered at Penn State, just does not come cheap. All colleges and universities in recent years have had costs go up, in part because of just embracing technology, bringing it to the classroom and bringing it to their students to become adept at a technologically oriented world and prepared for the future. Those are costly things. And then obviously the funding at state levels, which across the country have been very, very difficult. It seems that higher education is all too easy sometimes for to be put on the back burner when it comes to setting priorities for state budgets. And so as a result, if we're getting less funding from the state, as appreciative as we are for every penny we get, it's not kept pace with the needs of expanding our services to many, many more students over the years and providing a high-quality education that's producing some of the greatest graduates to help lead this country of any institution, I think.
Well, that's about all the time we have for now, other than some brief concluding remarks. I would just like to remind you that we have several other forums coming up. And let me see if I can find you. Oh, can't find that right now, but I will remind you that coming up on Monday, October 22nd, you can tune in to WPSU to watch the presidential debate on foreign policy, followed by Penn State students' reactions to the debate in a forum led by sociologist Sam Richards. He's a senior lecturer in the College of Liberal Arts and director of the World in Conversation program. And then on Monday, October 29th, the topic will be the environment, and our presenter will be Dr. Richard Alley, the Evan Pugh Professor of Geosciences in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences. And again, I'd like to thank everyone tonight for joining us here. A very special thanks to Anna Griswold and Paul Whitehead for being our special guests. A thank you to the Penn State Glee Club for their beautiful rendition of the Star Spangled Banner. And thank you very much to Penn State Public Broadcasting for making this available on the web. Thank you very much. Good night, and we hope you'll all turn out to vote on November 6th.